You're listening to Tell This Story. I'm Doug White, a veteran, retired law enforcement officer, and the author of Hiding in Plain Sight. This is a platform for those who serve in our families to share their experiences and help one another grow. This isn't therapy. It's truth, the tactics, and a way forward. It's an opportunity to become stronger than before, together. This episode is fueled by Polestar Coffee, veteran-owned and operated craft roasted coffee for people who live on the X. Use code THISSTORY at checkout for 10% off your order. Now let's get to work. Welcome to Tell This Story. Well, Chris, welcome to Tell This Story. How are you doing today?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me. And I'll just say this early on. I've been reading your book and really appreciate it. It's well written, and I think it tells an important story in a very effective way. So I wish you all the best with getting that book out there to be read and exposed to other people.
Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. That's very high praise, and thank you. Your book as well, Operator Syndrome, which we'll talk about. Anybody who's seen my episodes knows that I have a problem with highlighting and tabbing pages. I run out of stickies pretty quickly.
I need to get some stickies for my reading.
Well, if you find it sticky worthy, I would love that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it afterwards. So if you would just tell our audience a little bit about your background. I know I covered it quite a bit in the extensive intro because you've had an extensive career. What made you decide to get into psychology in the first place?
I went to college, undergraduate, thinking I would be a history major. In my first semester of college, I took a psychology course that I just loved. And then I just kept taking psychology courses from that point forward. And so I majored as an undergraduate in psychology. I didn't really think of myself as a mental health clinician. So my first effort right after graduating from undergraduate went to law school. And I started law school a few months after I finished college. And so I arrived in Bloomington at the Indiana University. And my first week of law school, I just hated every moment of it. Every moment, realized I was in the wrong place. So I started Monday, I dropped out on Friday and went home and licked my wounds. And it took me a year to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And then the second year, I spent preparing to apply to graduate programs in psychology. And I was fortunate to get accepted into the University of South Florida. And I went there with the idea of wanting to work with veterans primarily. And I had my father was a veteran. My great-grandfather was a veteran of the Spanish-American War. And so I knew a little bit about how or I thought I knew a little bit about how war affected soldiers when they came home. So that was what I wanted to do. And I was able to do my dissertation research with Vietnam veterans. And my last year of training and my first job were at VA Medical Center in Charleston, South Carolina.
Your experience there at the VA, I know you ended up working there about 15 years, correct?
Right. Yeah. I was a full-time therapist for 7 years in a PTSD clinic. And then kind of on a whim, on a lark, I had applied for an NIH grant that surprised me and everybody else, I think, by getting funded. And suddenly I had to divide and allocate my time a little differently, but I didn't stop being a clinician. So the first 7 years I was full-time therapist, and then the next 8 years I was about 25% of my time was still clinical, working with veterans, and then the rest of it was funded to do research.
Departing from that, but kind of sticking in the PTSD realm, post-traumatic stress injuries. I don't like to call them disorders because I think it stigmatizes people. It's a disorder. There must be something wrong with me. But can I get the Chris Frueh definition of PTS, not the DSM-5, but how do you see it?
The PTS diagnosis, how do I see it? Well, so, we could get into a whole conversation about the history of the diagnosis going back to the Civil War when it was called soldiers' hearts, and then later World War I, shell shock. It was added as a psychiatric diagnosis, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, in 1980. And that was the third edition of the DSM. So it's, even to this point, it's still, that's 45 years ago. So it's still something of a relatively new diagnosis. When I showed up at the VA in 1991 for my last year of training, and my research was on PTSD, it was still a very new diagnosis. It was it was a decade after it had been added. We're now on the DSM-5, so we're 2 editions of this book later. And in DSM-4 and DSM-5, the definition of PTSD was revised each time. What we used to think of PTSD in the 80s and 90s was that it was an anxiety disorder. It was categorized as an anxiety disorder. It was in the anxiety disorder section of the DSM. We pulled it out. And I say we, meaning the field, pulled it out of the anxiety disorders in 2013. We pulled it out and we gave it its own category, and we created it into something very new and very different at that point, conceptually. And I guess there's another piece that's important to understand about PTSD. It was and is really the only diagnosis in the entire DSM, all of the psychiatric diagnoses. It's the only one that has an identified cause. For all the other psychiatric illnesses, the DSM is completely agnostic on causes. So depression, it doesn't specify a cause of depression. What we attempted to do with PTSD was to identify a quote cause, which is often referred to as the index trauma, as if there's just one trauma that you've experienced. So my definition of PTSD is that it's really about fear reactivity. Trauma, and then later reminders or cues of trauma have the effect of increasing physiological arousal. So it's that fear reactivity. You hear a noise or you smell a smell that reminds you of something you experienced, and your heart starts racing. Your breath you start to hyperventilate, you start to sweat, that kind of physiological arousal. And then associated with that is avoidance. So for somebody who has strong physiological reactivity, it's natural then to avoid those things that might cue or trigger that. Trigger is a more recent word. We used to call it cueing, C-U-E. And so for me, I still think of PTSD or PTSI as a disorder of cued reactivity and avoidance of feared cues.
Okay.
And it goes along, it often overlaps with depression and just general anxiety, sleep disturbance, and nightmares, or other ways of kind of having intense memories that affect you. What I have seen is several things. One is, if the folks that I work with don't really have the fear reactivity avoidance piece, they'll still go shoot at the range. They'll still do the work. They'll still jump out of perfectly good airplanes without any real trouble. Operators and law enforcement, it's not to say they're not affected. I think what we see is that arousal of that baseline physiological arousal definitely goes up, which should be the target of treatments. Unfortunately, most treatments don't target that. They don't address that. They don't deal with that. They kind of pretend like that's not really there. So the second problem with PTSD is pretty much anybody now who has either depression or general anxiety, if they complete a questionnaire for PTSD, they're almost certainly going to look like they have PTSD. Because we've added so many other symptoms to the diagnosis now.
Well, that seems like it's gotten quite muddied.
We've watered the diagnosis down, and we've watered down what is a traumatic experience. Now almost anything counts.
Yeah, a bad day. Like in one of the interviews, you said, the college experience, most kids see that as traumatic, and that may be a bad day or stressful, but
yeah,
I've seen trauma. That's not trauma. That's a busy day at school.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Yeah, I think we've done that a lot with words.
To your point there, Doug, I think you're right. We also, at the societal level, we've kind of lost perspective on what stress is. Stress and adversity have always been part of the human experience, and there's no way to truly eliminate them, but we've tried to. So now we have a younger generation that thinks if they're uncomfortable, that's a bad thing.
No, and stress, I mean, that moves you to action.
Yes.
I've got a deadline for this paper. I've got to prepare with an interview with Chris Frueh. I mean, these things drive you to be better and to perform and to either be optimal or to fail. You said something a moment ago about the baseline. Over the years, the cumulative stressors, or as you call it, the allostatic load. I was listening to a podcast you were on, and they were speaking about homeostasis and allostasis. And this was some time ago, but I was writing down notes feverishly as y'all were going through the conversation. And, it's my understanding from that conversation that homeostasis is a return to normal. Well, in
Mm-hmm.
allostasis, you said that it was, well, the allostatic load is cumulative. So
Mm-hmm.
with that, in my base understanding of the conversation was that with allostasis, you continue to move that marker to a new baseline each time. You never, in the world of operators and the world of first responders, there's very little time, if any time, to return to a state of homeostasis. There's always more and
Therein,
more and more.
right. Therein
Um,
lies the problem. A lot
and,
of the
and I
problem.
was going to ask you that. I mean, yes, a new baseline becomes a thing. It's like strength training,
Mm-hmm.
as in your words, you habituate. It's just something you become used to. But
Mm-hmm.
is there a point where you are physically, physiologically, emotionally, that you just, is there a break? And obviously, I know the answer for me. I know where mine was, but
Yeah.
is that what we run into if we don't give time?
Well, I don't want to use the word break or broken, but yeah, absolutely. So as you go through a career in law enforcement, firefighting, combat, war, special operations, infantry soldiers, over time, everything accumulates. So the repetitive stress injuries in your joints, if you keep running, keep lifting heavily as you get into your 30s, 40s, 50s, you're accumulating injuries and damage. And it's that same, that's your musculoskeletal system, but every other system in the body is affected in a similar kind of way over time as that allostatic load just builds and there's never a release valve or a release opportunity. Brain injuries, we saw this with football players and boxers and other professional and semi-professional athletes. A career of taking blows to the head. It may not be that first one, it may not be the fifth one, but over time, if you keep sustaining those impact forces to the head, you're accumulating concussions and your brain is getting more and more and more injured. So part of what happens, I think, with, I'll just say, operators over time is they don't take time off, so they don't heal. There isn't the healing opportunities. And there's just more and more accumulation of the allostatic load, which is a hypothetical concept to describe the physiological burden on all of the systems in the body. So the nervous system, the endocrine system, the musculoskeletal system, the respiratory system, cardiovascular, metabolic systems, all of these systems get affected and they get worse over time.
I love that. So that moving into operator syndrome, what is operator syndrome?
Yeah. Well, several different places we could start. Let me start with this. So, just as we've just talked about, one of the assumptions is that a career in military special operations or many first responder roles involves an ongoing allostatic high level of massive allostatic load. And so it's inevitable that this massive dose of allostatic load, as it accumulates, is going to have a profound impact on all of the body's physiological systems. So operator syndrome is a framework to help understand the constellation of the interrelated injuries and impairments that are going to develop. And so again, I think an important word here is framework. I like that you've used framework. It's not a medical diagnosis, it's a framework. And we can use the framework in two different ways, but they're obviously connected. One way is for someone like you, Doug, who's later in a career, and we're trying to understand and treat the injuries that have accumulated over the years. So it's about treating a constellation of severe injuries and impairments now. But if we use this framework, if we applied it to, say, a 20-year-old who's just signing their first contract or just starting a career in law enforcement or the military, we can think of it as a framework to help better maintain their health, better maintain their functioning across all the important domains of functioning. So it's both a framework to understand treatment downstream, but also prevention and mitigation of injuries earlier and throughout a career.
I love that you made the distinction between old guy versus new guy. And one of the questions I wanted to ask later on is, and I will ask later on, is what we can do to use this framework. I mean, is it annual? physicals through your organization where they keep track of those things. I think that's, we do all those things when we come into the job, but there's no out process like there is in the military. So we know your baseline when you're 22, but go away.
Go
Here's your
away.
cake and your retired badge, and now piss off. And that's it's a feeling that I've read in several books, and it was obviously my feeling too, as you'll see in the book. But I want to come back to that. But with operator syndrome, what falls in the framework? What are some of the hallmarks that we should be looking for?
Yeah. Well, I can go through the domains really quickly. So let's start with traumatic brain injury, a TBI, which is pretty much inevitable in a career in special operations. And I think we know a little bit about impact forces and concussions. We're learning much more about breaching, blast exposures, what modern warfare and much of what law enforcement and firefighters deal with in terms of anything that explodes sends out a shock wave, an overpressure wave that's going to have a shearing effect. It goes through our soft tissue and it causes a different type of injury to the brain than a concussion does. And over time, we're now learning that the accumulation of blast exposures, much like an accumulation of concussions, that it causes worse and worse damage, but it's a different type of damage. So the damage, the injuries, the traumatic brain injuries that soldiers and responders experience is complicated because it's often both blast exposures and impact forces and things like oxygen deprivation, being choked out, diving. Things. And then you add on that all the whiplash experiences of tactical driving, of rucking, of jumping and rappelling out of airplanes and helicopters. You add to that the toxic exposures that are inherent in many, many environments. You add to that the sleep deprivation and the alcohol use, the heavy alcohol use that's common in many in these lines of work. So there's a whole lot of vectors that are just hammering the brain year after year after year. So I always start with traumatic brain injury. And just to say a little bit more about that, it's hard for us to really diagnose traumatic brain injury. What we know about chronic traumatic encephalopathy and the long-term damage caused by blast exposures, which has been labeled interface astroglial scarring. To really understand both of those, we can't do it while you're alive. It's post-mortem studies. So what we can do is we can talk to you about headaches. We can talk to you and assess your cognitive functioning, cognitive impairments. We can look at your balance and disequilibrium. That's another common outcome of TBI is impaired balance, vertigo. Sometimes guys are very nauseous as well when they're dizzy and unsteady on their feet. We can do MRI or PET scans, but those really aren't as sensitive as people might think. They aren't really great diagnostic instruments for most people with a potential TBI. So I'm putting a lot on TBI here, and so I talk about that first. But let me go through some of the other things which are influenced by TBI. So that's partly why I say these are all interconnected. So sleep disturbance, of insomnia, sleep apnea, you mentioned, just the overall circadian disruption of night work, of traveling across time zones. And if you're not sleeping well, your brain isn't recovering. And if your brain is injured, that contributes to insomnia. So it's a vicious cycle right there. Then we add hormonal dysregulation. Low testosterone is very common, and it can appear as early as, the early 30s. Sometimes it's low coming off of deployments or coming out of very intense training or deployment experiences. It can be low for a while and then it can come back up. But as people cycle through that year after year after year, it gradually can go lower and lower and not. We have all the psychological things, the depression. I would put anger up there. Depression and anger are two of the very common features. And anger, I associate anger a lot with anxiety and that physiological arousal. If you're already at an 8 or a 9 of physiological arousal, if that's your baseline,
going to 10 is nothing.
Going to 10 is really pretty quick and easy.
Yeah.
And
I can relate.
Yeah. So if we can get that baseline lowered down to a 3 or a 4, like with a stellate ganglion block treatment, that actually usually has a huge impact on reducing the irritability and the anger and helping guys and gals sleep better. We see a lot of substance abuse. Fire stations, law enforcement, military units often have a culture of heavy drinking. So that's not unusual. We see impairments to many of the perceptual systems. I've mentioned balance, but also vision. It can be impaired. Hearing, obviously, when you're around loud noises, that can cause both ringing in the ears, but also hearing loss. I think an underappreciated issue is the chronic pain.
It's just the cost of doing business.
It's the
That's
cost of
the
doing
baseline.
it. Right. And guys don't even talk about it. Sometimes I'll ask somebody like, how much pain are you? Oh, no, I'm fine. No, I mean, no, really, how much pain are you in? How do your ankles feel? How does your back feel? Well, yeah, they hurt, but that's just normal.
Yeah, 5 out of 10 is just operating pace. That's it.
Yeah, yeah. And guys are like you, they're breaking an ankle and they're not taking a knee. They try to keep going. And on and on and on. And then you add the headaches and the migraines that a lot of guys have. So that baseline level of daily pain can be pretty enormous. And of course, if you're hurting, whether you admit it or not, that's going to affect your sleep. It's going to affect your mood. It's going to affect your sociability with other people. And we ignore it too often. And there's things we can do for it that don't involve opiates. We can treat chronic pain in a variety of different ways. One of the things that I talk about with guys a lot when I'm coaching is, hey, if you're no longer active duty, what mission are you training for? Because we always train for the mission, right? Well, if you're no longer active, you're training for a very different mission. You're not training to carry 120 pounds on your back and run 20 miles with that.
But what if there's a guy in the gym that is doing that and you got to show him what's what? That's a real thing. That could happen.
I get it. You want to stay lethal. You don't want to not look dangerous. There are alternative ways to train. And so what I encourage guys to use is variable resistance bands, the big, heavy, thick bands that are like large circular rubber bands that work with a bar and a plate that you thread them under. You can stay jacked. You can get jacked with a band system like that. What you're not doing with those systems is you're not putting the same type of strain and stress on your joints. So bands work with your strength curve instead of against it, which free weights and body weight exercises do. I switched over to all band workouts about 4 years ago. So I'm in my late 50s at the time. And I'm not that I was a tactical athlete ever or anything like that, but a lot of pain in my joints. Within about 3 months, all that pain disappeared, just dissipated gradually. I used to do this whole complex thing for years of floor exercises for my back, stretches, crunches, planks. I carried a special pillow with me on airplanes when I traveled, a lumbar pillow, all this stuff. I don't do any of that anymore. And I don't have any pain. My back just it got better because I stopped injuring it doing those kinds of workouts.
Well, that's it. I'm moving to bands because I do all of those things.
Yeah,
my floor exercises are before I get out of bed.
It's bed exercise. And to be clear, I'm not talking about the little hollow tubes that have handles at the end of them. I mean,
the thick rubber band. Yeah, I've seen those. Those are impressive.
Yeah. And you can go heavy on them. You can, there's bands out there that will go up to 600 pounds of resistance on them.
Well, that's that. What else can we do? I'm sure diet and regular exercise and of course sleep.
Absolutely. Yeah. So absolutely. Diet, exercise, regular sleep, anything and everything we can put a focus on in our sleep and then eating and living taking a healthier approach to our lifestyles. Let's come back to that because I haven't even gotten all the way through the operator syndrome domains. So we were just talking about chronic pain, cognitive impairments, so concentration problems, short-term memory problems, especially difficulty staying organized, difficulty learning new material. A lot of guys get out of the service and they're trying to learn a new career. They're going back to school. They're trying to figure out how to fit into a different type of culture and society. Well, guess what? All of that is much harder with the TBI. Learning new things is hard with the TBI. So that's a real thing. And another issue is one of the things that I hear a lot is family members, spouses in particular, get frustrated when their partner doesn't remember things, doesn't do the chores, doesn't bring the right groceries home, doesn't show up for the appointments. And that can often be misread as being, well, he's a jerk, or he doesn't care, or he's not really trying. But those are often, I'm not saying that there isn't some of that stuff, but there is a lot of that is caused by TB, traumatic brain injuries. And so then we have all the physiological systems. Now those injuries and impairments start to roll out and affect all the social systems that we have around us. So marital challenges are massive. Issues with children, intimacy is difficult. We can talk about sexual intimacy for sure, and part of that is when testosterone is affected, but also emotional intimacy. Very common result of the kind of roles we're talking about is when you spend every day of your work either seeing awful things that have happened to people or that people have done, or at least at the very least, those are potentially there every single day. It raises your threshold for stress and trauma. And so what we often see is spouses of an operator or a law enforcement officer will say, you've become insensitive. You're not empathic anymore. Other people can perceive you as being cold, not caring. It's just not as sensitive. And that's something that I think is almost universal. Transitions are another challenge. Transition points, which for a soldier, that could be coming home from a deployment. We see the TVs and movies where the soldiers, the plane lands or the whatever, and the family meets them on the flight line, and there's this great big happy reunion. Well, and then those happy reunion moments are probably there often, but it's hard coming home from a deployment. It's hard for the family. It's hard for the soldier. And it's not just hey, everything's wonderful again now that we're reunited. It's much more tricky than most people realize. Then you have the transition at the end of a career. Now our soldier has to find a new way of living, a new job, has to learn how to fit into a different society, because civilian society is very different from military society. It's a different culture. Much of the language is the same, but not all of it. I've talked with recent newly minted veterans who have raised issues like, I don't even know how to dress for work. In the military, they told you how to dress. They gave you the clothing.
What is business casual?
Yeah, what the heck is business casual? And of course, even business casual today isn't the same as it was 20 years ago. For responders, I think it's even, it's different and maybe even more challenging. For a first responder coming home at the end of every shift. Mm-hmm. You're not coming home at the end of 6 months away in a foreign land, and your transition is not this big thing that happens at the end of 20 years. I mean, yeah, that comes too at some point, but as you know, putting on a uniform, doing a shift, whether that's an 8-hour, 12-hour, 48-hour shift, as some firefighters might do, and then the things you see and do during the course of that shift, and then you come home and you're pouring Cheerios for your children and scooping cat litter and trying to have a conversation with your spouse about whatever is going on in the house, and you're trying not to bring all that allostatic load, I'll just call it that, all that existential allostatic load home with you. That's a challenge, and I don't have any great answers for how to make that easier.
That's the $1 million question. How do you offload in 5 to 10 minutes drive home?
Right. How do you do that? I mean, there are things. Maybe it's a cold plunge. Maybe it's a hot sauna. Maybe it's an hour of meditation, or just coming home and sitting in your favorite chair and having nobody talk to you for an hour, whatever. But it's really challenging. And then the other piece of it is, and this is something that the soldiers always talk about with me, is they'll say, well, we had it easy because we're fighting in Iraq. We're in Afghanistan. We're on the enemy's home territory. We're taking the fight far away to them. Whereas responders, it's their home territory. It's your hometown. It's your own neighborhood. It's your community.
Yeah. There's no respite.
There's no respite. So you go to the grocery store. Who do you see there? What do you see happening there? There's no time for you just to kind of feel like you can kind of relax and let things be. You're out with your family. How are you not going to be vigilant, hyper vigilant? How are you not going to be looking around to see who is around? And you know things. You know where the hot spots are. We were talking before we started the podcast about some of the old neighborhoods we used to know in Tampa a few decades ago. And well, this neighborhood, that neighborhood, this block, that block, where to go and where not to go and where things are happening. So yeah, that's a whole other level. I don't have great wisdom on that. We mentioned toxic exposures. And then the last thing I'll say is part of I think a very important part of operator syndrome or responder syndrome are the existential concerns. And they're many and they're complicated. And it's not that every soldier has all of the existential concerns, but most have some of them. And we can go through those as much as you like. If you like.
Yeah, let's hit a couple of those.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we talk about, the big one forever, we've talked about guilt and shame, and we acknowledge and we know that those are powerful things that affect soldiers and responders. And sometimes it's the things that we did, and sometimes it's the things that we didn't do. The sins of omission, the sins of commission. And every guy I know has at least a handful of moments in their career where they went left and maybe they could have gone right. They went left, somebody died. If they'd gone right, what would have happened? Or they didn't do this, or maybe they didn't do anything at all, but somebody died in their place. Guys that I know, guys that were supposed to be on this helicopter got pulled off at the last moment. Whoever was in their seat, the helicopter went down and that person didn't survive or maybe got injured badly. I wear a casualty bracelet of Michael Mansour. Mr. Mansour died in Iraq in 2006. He was a SEAL, and he was up on a roof with two of his brothers, and a grenade came up, and he sacrificed his life to save his two brothers. And I didn't know Mansour, but I'm very close to one of those other guys who survived because of Mansour. So I kind of honor his experience in that moment. I wear this casualty bracelet, but that was an incredibly challenging pain for him to live with for many years. His brother died for him, and he lived because of his brother. How do you reconcile?
I don't know how to answer that question, or do you ever? I think anybody listening to this podcast knows of Michael Mansour, Mikey the Protector, and the rooftop, and the people you're speaking of. That's an incredible story in and of itself. The survival story, the sacrifice story, the service story. It's every bit of it's incredible.
Yeah. And Mike Sorelli is the friend I'm referring to.
Yes, sir. You'll see him in my book as well.
Okay.
I am a huge fan of Mike Sorelli. Okay. He was one of the drive-by mentors on my journey. So it's a pretty incredible guy.
Well, he's on the cover of my book.
I know.
The top book. And I'll give Mike credit. How do you recover from something like that? And I don't know all of the details of how he did it, but a huge part of it was recognizing and accepting that Michael Mansour died for him because he loved him and wanted him to have a life. And for Mike to waste that opportunity feeling bad about things is not what Mansour would have wanted for him. And so I think Mike has taken that and he's pretty much, he lives a life of service to others. And I think that's one way in which to surmount and to manage and to, I don't want to say overcome, but manage is probably a better word, some of those feelings of guilt and loss. There are maybe a few other ones that are worth mentioning. I think killing is a very unusual experience for humans. Most of us never take a life, another human life. How do we can't relate to that, most of us. But for a soldier, and for law enforcement and for others, there are times where killing is part of the job. It's part of what has to be done to accomplish the job or the mission. It's part of what might have to be done to survive. And so we can talk about the horror of killing, and that's a very real thing for many, not all, but many. The flip side of that, for many guys who have done quite a bit of killing in war, there's a thrill. There's an exhilaration to killing another soldier and surviving that encounter. And we don't talk about that. Soldiers don't talk about that. But it's not uncommon. I'm not saying it's universal, but it's not uncommon for operators to, when it comes up, when they're asked in the right moment, to acknowledge that they liked it. They miss it. It was a special kind of thrill. And at the same time, they can't talk about it, so they don't talk about it. So it's a secret that they live with, that they liked it. And they feel guilty about that. So very complex thing. There's the horror of killing, there's the thrill of killing, and there's the guilt of having that thrill. Complex thing. We often assume the first piece of that, the horror of killing.
Mhm.
We frequently don't attend to the rest of it.
I can agree with that. It's, read the book. So I wanted to go back to every bit of this, the framework. My biggest question here, and I think we hit on this prior to us starting to record. I am a layperson. I am not an academic. I'm not a clinician, MD, PhD, none of that. But looking at this, and I don't know if I'm biased because I can touch on a lot of these things and through lived experience, but it seems to me that this framework makes absolute sense, and attacking the cure and preventing these things, or at least understanding when they do come up. It seems to me that they have to be handled individually, but also as a holistic approach. You need to attack, or you need to at least identify as many of these as you can and treat each of them, because it seems to me that with treating one and not the other just keeps you
Yes.
trapped in a doom loop. Again, you said if you're
Yes.
not sleeping, your body's not repairing. If your
Right.
body's not repairing, your brain's not repairing, your endocrine system goes to trash, depression, cognitive decline. Every one of these things just feeds one another.
It's a humongous, great big, gigantic, vicious cycle.
I know it, having been chewed up by it for years and
Yeah.
years without even knowing what it was. And again, I am so grateful for your work in this to find this framework and to put it out like this, to finally give me an answer and a place to start. Why are people so resistant? And not people, but I'm sure that anybody who's lived this or understands this or has read the book can identify parts of themselves in here. But why is the medical community and the psychology community, why are they resistant to grab onto this and say, my God, here it is? Or at least, hey, this could be an answer. Let's test it out for a little bit. Let's see it, try it on, see if it fits.
Well, let me see if I can understand your question a little bit better than I do. Are you wondering why modern Western medicine has not sort of gravitated to using this framework?
It's a two-part. That one, yes. And also, and I wasn't specific enough, but yes, why isn't modern Western medicine grabbing onto this? And two, when I go to the VA, how come I speak to a primary care that wants to see how my cholesterol is, but then I've got to go see an endocrinologist, then I've got to go to mental health, and none of those people are talking to each other and they have full access to everything.
Right. Right.
Why is this thing, you have the fix? Why is everything else around it broken? I guess is really the question.
Right. Well, oh man, here's a long conversation. How do we fix American healthcare? How do we fix Western medical healthcare?
Let's bring it in a little bit. We can go everywhere there.
But there are some, I think there are some fundamental points here that are really part of the problem and are, across the board realities for all of us trying to get our health care. And so one is everybody is specialized now. Medicine is divided into specialties, and you've got your endocrinologist and their office is down the hall here, and you got the mental health folks and they're down that way and they're in that wing, and your sleep doc is maybe over here in a different building on the other side of town, et cetera. And it's all fractured, it's all fragmented. So there isn't a holistic approach. Primary care docs, in theory, are the quarterbacks. They're the coordinators of everything. Problem is they don't have time. They're not given the time. It's not their fault. The systems now have said you have 6 minutes per patient on average. So that means you got to see 10 patients every hour. And if you only see 9 patients an hour for the first 6 hours of the day, and you get to the last 2 hours of the day, wow, now you're way behind and you're going to be working, you got to really spend more time. So we've got a system that in a lot of ways just is not working very well. It's not designed to work very well the way it's evolved to be designed, at least. So that's a challenge for all of us. Another challenge is there is always a lag time as we, as clinical scientists, learn something, study it, publish it. There's a lag time where frontline clinicians learn about it and pick it up and become comfortable incorporating it into their care. So, for example, the operator syndrome paper, we published it in 2020. Let's say it's now 4.5 years later. I wouldn't expect any kind of miraculously, paradigm shift in healthcare that quickly. That isn't anything that we can expect or hope for. Now, I would say when we talk about mental health care, I think an easy question to ask with some righteous anger is, why is modern mental health care only really relying 98% of the time relying on therapy and psychiatric medications? Why is it so hard to get some of the other treatments that exist now, relatively new treatments, stellate ganglion block therapy, ketamine therapy, transcranial magnetic stimulation therapy, psychedelic therapies, vestibular therapies, some of the things that are really good for treating traumatic brain injury, and just simply the role of living a more anti-inflammatory lifestyle, which is about diet, which is about sleep, which is literally about lifestyle. Why are we not helping people learn to live healthier lifestyles? Guarantee you, if I go out, or if any of us go out and we eat at McDonald's or fast food every single day for a couple of weeks, we're going to be feeling horrible. We're going to be feeling depleted. We're going to feel tired. We're going to feel depressed. Our immune functioning, our endocrine functioning, none of that's going to be optimal. So a lot of what we do to ourselves, as a society. And modern medicine doesn't help us with those things. They don't teach us. They don't talk to us. They don't, for the most part, don't really help redesign our lifestyles, help us redesign our lifestyles. So those are all things that need to happen. Something happened a couple weeks ago in the Congress, in the most recent National Defense Act, in the most recent NDAA, put a thing in there. I don't know what the right language is. I don't have the language, but they've mandated more attention to hormones in special operators. So the next Secretary of Defense is going to have to go in and talk to Congress about hormones and testosterone. So they're now pointing and recognizing, wait a minute, here's a problem that we really have not attended to very well. So that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. That's a good piece. And I think part of what will come out of that is more requirements for study. They're going to mandate research, would be my expectation. They've done this more in recent years with psychedelic treatments. They've mandated that VA and DoD study psychedelic 8 compounds as therapeutics for TBI and existential PTSD type injuries.
It's all very interesting. I'm glad that the DoD is driving a lot of that.
I don't know that the DoD is driving much.
No?
I think the DoD Congress is raising questions.
Okay. I'm wondering where that pressure's coming from.
Well, okay. And so you have quite a few veterans now in Congress.
Yeah.
You have Morgan Luttrell. Congressman Luttrell is a co-author on the operator syndrome paper, former Navy SEAL. I think another piece of it is, as we were talking about earlier, there's a ground up phenomena that's happening now. Veterans and responders, the boots on the ground folks, are saying, wait a minute, I don't want the starter kit of medications for PTSD. I want something different. I need something different. So I think one of the things that I see everywhere I look now is where the establishment and the leadership are all saying, no, take your time. We've got this. We're studying things. We'll be ready in 5 or 10 or 20 years to provide some good treatments. The grassroots is saying, no way. Mm-mm. We need it now. And we didn't talk about this, but the suicide rates.
I say a 22 plus a day. This is necessary now. This is not a 20-year from now problem or solution.
100% exactly right. And then the suicide rates in SOF might be higher than for other groups of veterans. I don't know, but like every week I hear a name of somebody who took their life. In first responders, it's through the roof, as you know. And so we're not just talking about trying to help people, with their quality of life, although that's very important as well, and their functioning in life. We're trying to save lives. We're trying to save marriages. We're trying to save men and women from doing things that they cannot, that can't be undone. Mm-hmm. You put a Glock in your mouth and you pull the trigger, it's over, and there's no way to recover that from that moment. That's what brings so much urgency, I think, to what we're trying to do now.
I recently, November 1st, when I finished the first week in December, I underwent ETMS treatment, and it was actually 3 veterans, but 2 of them are elected officials. One is Danny Alvarez. He's a state representative here in Florida. And the other one is Senator Jay Collins, who's retired Green Beret. They got a hold of some information from their legal aid, or Danny's legal aid, who's former Ranger, and they were able to get legislation passed to sponsor treatment here in Florida for 2 years for ETMS. And there's three clinics now in the state, and there's going to be 6 here relatively quickly. And I got a phone call one day, and they said, hey, we were told that you'd be interested in this, and you're the first patient. Can you be here tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.? I mean, they literally opened that day. I walked in, and they were still putting desks together. And I said, I have no idea what this is or why. And they told me who was responsible for it. And it's like, well, I guess I got lucky. Maybe I was the first person that they were thinking about when this happened, because it's down the street from my house. And I've got to tell you, I was not a believer. We did the first EEG, and then I went through and saw the changes over the next 2 EEGs after the treatment.
And say more about what the treatment is, because some listeners.
So ETMS is the transcranial magnetic stimulation. And what they did is they did an EEG to find out the alpha, delta, and theta, beta and theta waves.
They use the EEG to
target the waves.
Precision.
Yes. And it is targeted for me, for my waves. And they're basically trying to calm down the other waves, but to stabilize the alpha waves, depression, hypervigilance, anxiety, those sorts of things, cognitive function, the executive functions. From my understanding, it's still very fuzzy to me. So over the course of that, there are 15-minute treatments, and it's based on my EEG. The treatment protocol is, for this many seconds over 15 minutes, you'll have this many stimulations. And I guess it's an electromagnetic that sends pulses through the front of my head with a small magnet. You're laying back in a nice leather recliner. Lights are off, your eyes are closed, and you hear a ding, and 5 seconds later, you get the pulses. And that's a course of 15 minutes. Non-invasive, painless, medication-free. And they describe it that, what was it? The brain is something like 2% of your body weight, but requires 70% of your body's energy to move, or something like that. Basically, they say get a snack afterwards, because your brain's been on a treadmill for 15 minutes in a full sprint, and you're going to take a nap in the afternoon. Well, I didn't believe that. Let me tell you something. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, I slept like a baby, and I had childlike dreams. So I made sure to get my sugar snack afterwards. But over the course of that month and those 20 treatments, headaches were gone. No migraines, no headaches. I had 2 nightmares during the course of that month, whereas before, even with the medications from the VA, I was experiencing 3, 4, 5 a week. I was having childlike dreams that I could remember. You mentioned earlier going from 8 or 9 to 10 was nothing. Well, about halfway through the treatment, spilt milk that would normally take me from 8 to a 10 just became spilt milk. It wasn't a big deal. Hypervigilance was still an issue, and I don't know that goes away after 30 years of being in that state. But it has been reduced. I went to coffee with Representative Alvarez just the other day and sat with my back to the door for an hour, and it didn't bother me, which normally I would be exhausted if I even did that to begin with. So anecdotally, everything that it was supposed to do, I experienced, and then seeing the EEG and having it explained to me, everything regulated. My issues with cognition are starting to resolve themselves, which is something the VA or any medical professionals that I had dealt with previously, they're like, well, get better sleep. Well, this is untreated sleep apnea. That's all it is. Well, untreated, you've given me the mouthpieces and the CPAPs and all these pills that I should be taking that I don't take. So, but we can't give you, Ritalin or anything like that, because it'll bring in anxiety. So how do I take care of this brain fog? Why am I reading the same page 5 times? Your testosterone. No. I mean, it's just, they always say, go see everybody else. The point here is
that's exactly it. That's exactly it.
It's not their problem.
Go see the guy down the hall.
It's the other dude down the hall who just sends you back or says, you need to see a specialist, or we'll deal with this next time when you pay the next copay. But ETMS was a game changer. And from what I understand with what I've been told and the research they have so far is that it only will increase. Your brain will continue to heal as long as you check your circadian rhythm, sleep hygiene, no blue lights, sunlight first thing in the morning. Basically everything that Dr. Huberman tells you to do that with sleep, and no booze and no painkillers or anything like that. And your brain will continue to heal itself. And it's been remarkable. It really has.
Yeah. So, that's phenomenal. I'm glad
yes, sir.
Glad you found that. Glad you're benefiting from it. And now
they found it for me.
What is it? Well, it found you.
Yes.
But what does it take to get that for other folks now is the question.
That is a good question.
How do we get, there's a handful of really powerful, game-changing, life-changing treatments that we are almost just not using at all, because the VA or insurance companies or whoever gets to make those decisions say, well, we don't think those work well enough, or the evidence isn't there yet to use those, or those are too expensive. Yeah, there's some evidence, but they're too expensive. How do we start to change that? And one of the things that I have seen develop over the last 5 years is, especially in the special operations community, folks have just said enough. We're not waiting anymore. I'm not going to wait for the government to figure this out and provide it. Nobody's coming to save us. We're going to do it ourselves. And so you have now all these veteran, or even in some cases active duty or responder started foundations, nonprofit foundations that have risen up and are providing these treatments. And I'll just talk about one because I work very closely with the SEAL Future Foundation. And they were started by former Navy SEALs. And if you're a SEAL and you call their health program, you're going to talk to another SEAL. You're going to talk to somebody who's no longer active duty, but has experienced what you've experienced. So you're talking to a peer, and that peer is usually, most of the guys in the health program are former medics, and we've built a program collaboratively, them, myself, and we have a board of medical providers that cuts across many disciplines. And so a SEAL can call, talk to somebody. They're not doctors. They're not making diagnoses. They're not prescribing treatments, but they'll help figure out, okay, what do you think you need? Here's some things we recommend. And then they will pay for it, and they will refer. They've got the referral network. Okay, we think you should go to this functional medicine clinic and do these things. We think you should get a stellate ganglion block. If you want to consider doing that, we'll pay for it. Here's some clinics. Go to your primary care doc and get a lot of this stuff checked out, and run it by them if you need to. I think they've helped in the last 3 years. I think they've served about 20% of all the SEALs alive on this planet in just 3 years.
Wow.
And every year they're getting more and more guys coming to them. Now, the SEAL community is a small community, but that model can be replicated. So what they and I and a few others, we're trying to work with some other groups who have seen what they've done and are getting interested. So there's foundations in Canada that want to do something similar. We're in conversations with folks in Israel that want to do some similar kinds of things. So they're starting to become models for how to sort of do a better job of providing the care that people need without relying on the government. Now, it does rely, they raise about $3 million a year to pay for this. The SEAL Future Foundation does, which is not everybody has the ability to do that. And if we think in terms of responders, we have very little out there in terms of benevolent foundations to serve and help with first responders. So we don't have all the answers, but there are ideas, there are things that are starting to show that they can make a real big difference.
I would agree with that. As far as getting it in every state, I think the veterans that are legislators now, that are in politics, government, I like the idea that they're there. That's why I gave the double thumbs up earlier for those listening at home. I think having the firsthand knowledge, that lived experience, I could say, no, this is exactly what it smells like, and this is what we need to do to fix it. I think that's great. Luckily, the program here for ETMS in Florida is for all first responders and veterans that live in Florida. But it's funded by the state.
By the state?
Yes, yes.
Phenomenal. That's phenomenal.
And there's also Ohio that does that. There's several states that are doing that now.
Okay.
And I'm hoping that takes off. Of course, they're reporting their findings back as part of the program to show that, the efficacy of it. Hopefully they can scale it to, there's going to be 6 here in Florida, all where the heavy veteran populations are. So hopefully they can scale that. One of the foundations you work with, the Boulder Crest Foundation.
Yes.
They are one of the first responder foundations. I've seen a lot that they do through Travis Grevel, somebody who I follow and hope to speak with here soon. There are foundations out there for first responders, and I think it's because, and again, I don't have anything to back this up other than my own observations, but it seems to me that the veteran community with PTS, operator syndrome, with looking for cures and things to help, basically just coming out and saying, yes, this is a problem. They're about 8 to 10 years ahead of the first responder community in actually raising our hand and saying we have a problem. I like that there is a cross reference as it is between the soldiers saying, "Oh yeah, but it's different for us. You know, we come home, we take the fight down range to the bad guy, and you know, firefighters and first responders, they live there." I think that's amazing, and I think that there's nothing in the world that cannot be accomplished if the communities get together and mirror what one another
Yes.
doing. I mean, there's some modifications there, obviously, with funding and culture, but to scale that from a veteran aspect to the first responder world, I think that's going to be key moving forward. And I can't wait to see what happens in the next year or two with legislation, where that's going to go. Forward thinking people,
Mhm.
you know, the Morgan
Yeah.
Luttrells of the world that are sitting in places to be able to make these things happen. So
Yeah.
looks exciting.
Yeah. And I share your appreciation for what some veterans are doing for first responders. And I think there's an enormous appreciation from veterans to first responders. And of course, many responders are also veterans themselves. But I also think there's an enormous appreciation, not just for what responders do and experience, but also with the idea that there's no VA for responders. There's no national program for responders. And then when you look at regions, states, or municipalities, there's quite a bit of variation there. But there's not much. Even if we just go look at the research, for every veteran medical paper, let me say this differently. The ratio of medical research papers published in 2023 or 22, I forget which year I looked at it, but it was the ratio for police, for law enforcement to veterans was 1 to 5. So for every law enforcement paper, there were 5 papers published on veterans. So a
Wow.
huge disparity in the research. And of course, the VA and DoD both fund research for soldiers and veterans. So not only are there is there a national healthcare system for veterans, but they also fund research. It's worse for firefighters. It's 1 to 5 for law enforcement. It's 1 to 20 for firefighters. So that we know almost nothing about firefighters in terms of the medical health effects of the
And that's
profession.
amazing to me because everybody loves a firefighter.
Yeah,
Who
exactly.
doesn't love a firefighter?
We all love them, but when do we ever think about them? Only when we need them.
Every year when I buy their calendar. Oh yeah, and whenever I need them. So
When we need them. When we're calling 911,
yeah,
that's when we think about our responders.
yeah, I would
And
agree with that.
the rest of the time, responders are they're there, they're functioning, they're doing their thing, but they're kind of invisible and they're in the background.
Unless we're holding them accountable for something, then we're the devil.
Unless we're blaming them for something that,
Yes, well
yeah,
that too. It's what they say you did. No, what did you do? So
yeah, yeah.
well, you know what? Let's hit some of the high points here. We know that awareness, as we said earlier, this is going to be a ground up thing, and that's where I guess the big push is going to be, at least
Mhm.
initially. So, would you recommend that just being aware that this framework exists and these are the things that are going to occur? And I want to specify here, and I meant to bring this up earlier, the things that you spoke about, the domains and the framework. It seems to me that other than deciding to take a drink or not to take a drink, or to take a pill or not to take a pill, it seems to me that everything else are things that aren't compelled. These things are happening like on a cellular level, whether we want them to or not.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I wanted to highlight that, or at least my understanding of that, to show people that may be experiencing these things. This isn't something that could be cured with a stoic attitude or, you know,
Right.
taking motion. These are
Right.
things that
Right.
are going to happen.
Right. And I think, you didn't use the word, but I think there is some stigma towards what are identified as mental illnesses or psychiatric illnesses. And my perspective on that is we're not really talking about psychiatric illnesses here. We're talking about whole body health here. And it's inevitable. You're going to have problems. It's not that you're weak. It's that you're born human. And if you do the job of an operator or a responder and you do that job for more than a few years, which pretty much people do, you are going to have these problems. It's like the law of gravity. What goes up is going to come down, and there's no shame, there's no stigma. And in fact, part of what I try to always make the point of, so much of what we're talking about here is physiological. And that gets back to PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury.
Mhm.
I mean, we can think of it as an injury to the nervous system.
I do like that it's a neurological change, not a defect.
We put the psychological in mental health care. We put the psychiatric diagnoses and the psychological stuff kind of forward, and then we know kind of way in the background, yeah, there's some physiological issues. My perspective is we need to shift them. We should be putting physiology forward.
Well, I
Because
think
then we're looking
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
because then we're looking at brain, at endocrine, at hormones, not just how many hours is somebody sleeping at night, but when are they sleeping and what is their brain doing while they're sleeping and what is their breathing doing while they're asleep, and all of these other things that have profound effects on what we call, quotes, air quotes, psychological.
I like I like your perspective on that because it places the physiological ahead of, and I think like if I had a broken arm, I could say my arm's not broken, but if you take an x-ray, look, there's the break.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
plain and simple to see. This is
Yep.
not something that you can just positive mindset and do
Right.
some meditation and it's going to heal, you know?
Right. And no one would feel bad about going to a doctor with a broken arm and saying, doc, I think my leg is broken or my arm is broken. Probably need a cast.
It,
And that's just is what it is.
I did,
You
but
gotta do it.
ultimately I had to get a cast,
You
but
did.
ultimately it's going to happen. But I think being able to frame it that way, there's no stigma. You know, it's like getting shin splints because you ran a marathon. You know, it's,
Right. Yeah.
if anything, these are, I don't want to call it a badge of honor, but it's, these are stripes that are earned. You know,
Yeah.
you have to do hard things to earn this. And this is it's not necessarily a badge of honor, but it's an indication that God, I don't really even know how I want to put this. It's an indication that you've done something with your life. That's how I look at this now.
And to really go back to the physiological point of it, if we look at what treatments really have profound benefits, I'll just pull two. Like ganglion nerve block is literally an injection of a medication into the stellate ganglion nerve that runs down your spinal column. It's a purely physiological treatment that has an immediate and profound effect of helping people feel relaxed and lowering their baseline level. I mean, yes, their physiological arousal, but it has the psychological effect of having people feel good and relaxed. The TMS treatment you had, pulsing magnetic stimulation to the head. I mean, it's purely a physiological treatment. Okay? You don't have to talk about your childhood. It's not about, some Freudian concept of how you felt about your mother. It's a physiological treatment that has the ability to really radically benefit your brain health and functioning. There's nothing frou-frou about it. These are treatments that can be so incredibly beneficial for people. And there's a quote I want to read from my book, if I may.
Please.
Do you mind? And part of what I think, so we talked about the lack of awareness, the lack of understanding, and why there's so much value in bringing awareness. So I'm going to read you this quote. It's from my book. It's the first quote at the top of chapter 1, and it's by a gentleman named Clay Jensen, who was a master sergeant in the Army, 7th Special Forces Group. He also worked as a private defense contractor overseas. And here's his quote. Every time I see a new primary care doctor, VA or civilian, they are completely overwhelmed by the sheer number and severity of the different medical issues I have. Nobody knows how to treat me. I'm completely different from any other patient they've had. For over 10 years, I struggled to understand why I am the way I am and to know what was really wrong with me. Then I came across an article on operator syndrome, and I was like, holy shit, I'm normal. I went from feeling totally alone to being part of the tribe again. And I think for me, I hear versions of that said quite frequently. It's the idea that there's a name given to something and that it's common. That everybody, hey, I thought I was the only one, and now I'm learning all the other guys have very similar kind of problems in much the same way, and are benefiting from the same kind of treatments that I can benefit from. And I think we just need, more awareness and more education out there.
No, I agree. And the study and the book, to speak once more about the book, when I started reading it, I could have hugged your book, just like the quote that you just read. it brought clarity to what I had been experiencing, but did not know. I didn't know how to fix any of it.
Or even how to talk about it.
No,
Probably.
no, it finally gave me a name to all of this. And one of the things that I have found out through having these conversations since I've published the book and started this and with this new mission that I'm on, the most commonly returned answer to me or comment to me was, I thought it was just me, or it's not just me.
Yes.
And
I hear that all the time. I thought it was just me.
yeah, and that's a powerful thing
Yeah.
to think you're
Yeah.
that alone, especially going
Yeah.
through a transition. Everybody's
Yeah.
still doing the
Yeah.
work and you're not. And
Yeah.
now you're withdrawing from your family. I mean, this, for anybody listening, the 4 people that are still with us, well, probably 3 people that started with us, whoever's still listening, Operator Syndrome by Dr. Chris Frueh. This was for me, roadmap. This was the start of the way forward. It's amazing. The work you've done with this, the paper, the contributors in the original study, everybody who gave their quotes. I mean, there are rock stars. If you pay attention to the operator world and Google some of these folks, if you have not heard of them, I mean, you've got the Satterleys in here. You've got Mike Sorelli. I mean, Gabrielle Lyon, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, Andrea Gallagher. I mean, just the people that are in here that contributed to this with their own experiences. It's remarkable. And I was telling people when this first came out and I first started speaking of it, they're like, oh, I'm not an operator. I'm like, yeah, it's a bit of a misnomer. If you take away the title and look at the physiological things that are happening, our experiences may be different or they may be experience adjacent, but our physiological responses and our emotional responses to the experiences that we have are damn near identical. It's the human condition. And, this is just me speaking from a lay standpoint. This affects a lot more people than just operators. And I think this is groundbreaking work, finding this framework and putting it out there. And I think this should be discussed in every fire academy, every law enforcement academy, EMS academy. This should be put out everywhere just to let people know that this is, Andy Stump said it best on his podcast with you last year, that there's a price and there's a cost. And, you need to be aware of those things when you're coming in. This is the cost of doing business, and this is the price you're going to pay. Me personally, I wouldn't have changed. I would have changed how I treated myself better. I would have answered to these things earlier than I did, but I would do it all over again. And I think that's a common theme that you'd hear from anybody in this space.
I absolutely hear that from pretty much everybody. I'd do it all over again if I had the chance to. I wouldn't change a thing other than how I might take care of myself. Well, Doug, I kind of feel like we're kind of wrapping up here. I want to first thank you for what you're doing, and I'm looking forward to finishing reading your book. It's terrific. I will be recommending it. And thank you for having me on your show. And if you ever want me to come back for another conversation, I just say the word. I'll be happy to come back.
Chris, I got to tell you, this is thank you. I've again, fanboy moment. I'm usually much more articulate than this. And in closing, do you have anything that you'd like to put out there? Any parting shots? What are you doing next? What's the next study?
My only parting shot is there's hope. I always like to conclude on a message of hope. There's hope for healing and recovery. I know so many guys, so many families, so many wives who have gone from very, very dark points in life to absolutely thriving and being happy and living their best life. And I know that. I know operators, I know law enforcement, I know firefighters, I know people who were artillery or combat engineers, infantry. I just know so many people who have been able to find the health and the healing and the recovery to really live a thriving life.
Well, that is amazing. Again, thank you so much for this and your time today. So thank you for joining us for this episode of Tell This Story. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Chris Frueh. If you'd like to connect with Dr. Frueh, you can find him on Instagram at Dr. Chris Frueh or on his website, chrisfrueh.com. Links are going to be in the show notes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, leave a 5-star rating and comment. Help us spread the word. Until next time.